Hey guys, Brandon here for the NCO Level 1 education course. This is Module 1, Pelvic Control and Base Movement Position. Our other coach, Andrew, you'll see him in some of the videos here in the presentation. So first one, obviously, like I said, Pelvic Control, Base Movement Position. So what is pelvic control? Pelvic control is overall awareness of your pelvic positioning, especially during movements, and then the ability to orient it accordingly. Being able to orient it is going to be means that you're able to use the muscles around your pelvis and use them correctly to orient that pelvis. So it'll end up looking like that picture over here on the left rather than the one on the right. So how do we get to, or what is neutral? So a neutral pelvis is where it's stacked under your rib cage, this canister position here on the left. So you can see that the pelvis is stacked nice and straight underneath the rib cage. Your abdominals here are pulled in, and your low back has a normal amount of arch. It's not excessively arched. If you look over here at the scissor position on the right, so you can see the rib cage is kind of flared up a little bit. The hips are tilted down, and then we've got excessive low back arching here and a big stretch on the abdominals. We don't want this. We'd like to have this here instead. So a lot of times we can have this occur by lifestyle habits like excessive amount of time spent sitting. A lot of people drift into this. To get from here to here, we simply work on being able to tuck the pelvis here the opposite way to get here. And we'll talk about how to do that as we go through this presentation. So again, like I said, physical inactivity, imbalanced strength training, genetic predisposition, foot pronation, poor exercise technique, and then extended periods of sitting with anterior pelvic tilt can all potentially lead to causing that in yourself or your soldiers. Again, all of these are kind of long-term chronic adaptations. They're not like an acute. You don't do this one time and suddenly I have anterior pelvic tilt. It's something that's going to happen over time. So as we work on fixing it in both yourself and your soldiers, it's something that is going to take time and practice to overcome. It's not going to be a one-time fix. So how does your pelvis affect other structures? We're going to look at these couple images here. So your pelvis is a good guide for what your body will do or what the other structures in your body will do or how they're going to align. So pelvic tilt, whether it's anterior here or like if it was posterior and this line was going this way, they're going to have a direct impact on the length and strength of your abdominals, hip flexors, hamstrings, and low back. So if we look at these two pictures here, this one we've got nice neutral positioning. Neither anterior or posterior tilt and good alignment of the connected musculature. In this scenario here where we're looking at anterior pelvic tilt, we've got stretched out and weakened abdominals here, short and tight as well as weak musculature in the low back, short, tight, and weak quads, and then long, tight, and weakened or taut and weakened hamstrings. And what this is going to do is it's only going to exacerbate the anterior pelvic tilt problem because this tight, this long and loose, this long and loose is going to keep trying to pull you further and further, or your soldiers, into anterior pelvic tilt. But the more important thing is you notice the spinal curvature here, nice neutral. We should have a curve in the spine, but this is about normal versus here, excessive arch here, big round here, and then head further forward. We don't want this to happen. We want to try to get as close to this as possible. When we're in this position, that anterior tilt, that's going to impact both mobility and strength, and then our ability to perform certain movements. So why does anterior pelvic tilt matter? Why does getting out of it important? One of the most common injuries sustained by those in the military population, they've done a big research article, is low back related injuries. And usually what happens is low back pain occurs. That leads to a compensation pattern to try to avoid that low back pain. So you compensate somewhere else in your body, whether during lifting or during day-to-day activities. This then leads to a long-term compensation pattern and poor technique, which then often leads back to a low back injury. So we want to try to avoid that low back pain so that compensations don't occur, so that then injuries don't occur. So to avoid this, the best way to start is to learn how to correctly orient the pelvis and how to maintain that while doing whether it's training activities in PT or everyday work activities or everyday life activities outside of the Army. We want to be able to make sure that if we're going to be in a position where we might be putting strain through the spine, that we can orient the pelvis correctly to help handle that stress in a safer manner. So teaching and correcting it. So this is where you guys are going to come in here, and then in all of the subsequent presentations. Andrew and I are only 2 people. There's 600-700 plus of you guys in the battalion. We will do our best to help everybody we can, but that's why we're here to kind of educate you guys so that then you can be empowered to try to help coach your soldiers when you see some of these things going on and provide them help when Andrew and I can't be there to help as often as we'd like to be. We can't see everybody at once. So it's important to understand we can't just stretch our way into proper pelvic alignments. We can't just look at this and be like, okay, well, if I stretch my quads and my low back, then it'll start to come back around. That's not what's going to happen. You actually have to learn how to get from here to here. And then once we get from here to here, we have to learn how to strengthen our muscles that are involved to better maintain and hold this position so we don't drift back to this. Okay. Just a quick caveat, I know we're talking about going from here to here, so getting out of anterior tilt into neutral. That doesn't mean that you're going to walk around and spend all day in neutral. There's going to be times where you're in anterior tilt. There might be times when you're in posterior tilt. We are not saying that this is a 100% all the time has to be like this. But rather than going around 95% of the time here and 5% here, we'd rather be 95% here and 5% here. So to get here and learn it, we got to practice it consistently. Soldiers have to be cognitive of this position, especially during PT or day-to-day activities that might stress the spine. It's not a crunch, and change is going to take time, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so first position to help kind of correct that anterior pelvic tilt is supine pelvic tucks here. So the starting position will be bent knees, allow for easier posterior tilting of our pelvis into a neutral position. So anterior, we kind of tilted toward the front. To get to neutral, we have to tilt towards the back or posteriorly. So you can see here, Andrew's going to kind of arch up. So it's like I could put my hand under his back there, and then as he tilts those hips posteriorly, this hand, which is under here, now becomes, you can't get a hand under there anymore. It becomes nice and flat. There's no more space. So first thing, practice just getting in and out of this, teaching yourselves and your soldiers what it feels like to have the hips actually move. Notice the shoulders aren't coming down. He's not doing a crunch. It's just hip movement. Okay. Once you're able to hold this position, start to implement some deep breathing, 3-4 second inhales, 3-4 second exhale while being able to hold that neutral position. And then a cue that you could use if you have somebody that's struggling is to focus on rolling the hips underneath you and pulling the rib cage down a little bit. But again, notice shoulders don't move. It's not a crunch. It's just very slight movement of the rib cage and then a nice tuck of the hips. But so this is kind of the first position. Once you master this, then we move on to the next. So the next position being half kneeling pelvic tucks here. So we want to make sure they perform reps with each leg forward. So he's got the left leg forward here. He would do a few reps on one side, then on the other. In terms of what's happening at the hips, this is identical to what he was doing on the floor. We've just now moved him to a slightly different position that may make it a little bit harder. You notice here that he's kind of overemphasizing this low back arch. That's not totally necessary in this particular one, but you still want to make sure that they can kind of arch or anteriorly tilt and then posteriorly tilt to get out of it, and make sure that these shoulders aren't coming down. His shoulders are actually moving slightly too much, not by much, but we really want to try to have totally still movement and have nothing happen at the shoulders. Yourself and your soldiers, when executing this particular one, you might notice more difficulty or tightness on one side than on the other. It's totally normal, and it's just going to be due to slight dominance of one side of the body over the other. It's nothing to be concerned about. Moving on to standing pelvic tucks. This would be the final progression in the pelvic tuck series and learning how to control that pelvis a little better. You can notice here that Again, hip action is entirely the same. We've now just gone to a standing position. This is going to obviously be the most relevant to any kind of lifting or PT actions, as well as a lot of life tasks. He's almost tucking too far here, just so you guys are aware. He's really overemphasizing it to make it easy to see, but you want to stop about neutral. You can see here he keeps going, and almost you can see that belt line start to tuck down in the back. We don't necessarily need that to happen, but we would like to get to at least neutral, that nice canister position. Maintain a nice tall posture. Notice that his shoulders and head aren't coming forward. The ribs come down just slightly, but he stays nice and tall. Again, everything else is the same as the previous two. We're just standing now. Moving from pelvic tilt to kind of base movement position, tying in how that pelvis ties into athletic movement. This is the posture that we'd love to have all movements start from and return to. This is a good spot with feet fairly straight ahead under the hips, knees slightly bent over the toes, hips pushed back, good athletic position. This allows Andrew in this case to push or move in any direction at a moment's notice, nice and smoothly. Notice that his back is nice and flat here. He's not excessively arched. He's not anteriorly tilted. He's not posteriorly tilted and super rounded. It's a nice flat back, eyes straight ahead, ready to react to something. This is where we want to kind of start any athletic movement, is from this position, this base movement position. We'll show a couple bad examples on the next slide, but this is a good spot to start from. Anything that doesn't look like this is going to set you up for some sort of limitation. So again, feet fairly straight, toes at 11 and 1, bend at the hips, knees, and ankles, neutral pelvis and ribcage position with your head facing forward. Some common errors you might see are feet too close together. What you can't see here in this picture is because they're a little close together, he's then a little bit rounded. Eyes are now looking at the ground. And with these feet close together, the first thing he has to do is widen out to be able to go anywhere. If he tried to quickly react in a certain direction, he might trip over himself because his feet are too narrow. Conversely, in this picture, feet are far too wide, toes are kind of turned out. What you can't see is his back is arched as well, so he's got some anterior tilt going on rather than having a neutral pelvis. We don't want this. Feet are a little too wide here. He's not in a good position to be able to drive in any direction. Or move very well. This is not super athletic. And to kind of tie this back for you guys, if you look at the previous slide where he was in a good position versus these two, imagine being in either one of these positions and carrying a ruck everywhere, trying to stand up from the ground with a ruck or quickly react to something. It's not a really great position to be in. To do that, you'd much rather be in that base movement position and be ready to react and move in any direction and be able to better distribute the load over the body. In summary, average person is going to drift into anterior pelvic tilt due to spending a large portion of their time sitting in a chair, whether that's school or work or home. It's a change in posture that's going to cause low back pain and the perceptions of hamstrings and hip flexors feeling tight. We can correct this through proper strengthening regimens as well as developing an individual awareness for what neutral and proper positioning should feel like. Again, the tilt took years to happen for yourself or that soldier, so it's going to take a lot of time to be able to fix it. It shouldn't take years, but it should take a little bit of time of conscious and focused effort to fix. And then pelvic positioning and base movement posture are going to affect movement quality and how the movement feels while doing it. And the reason that this is our first presentation is if we get the pelvis positioning right, that allows us to get the base movement posture right. If we get the base movement posture right, that allows us to be set up in a good position to learn how to squat, or be set up in a good position to learn how to hinge, etc. But if I get pelvis positioning wrong, then I'm going to have my base movement positions wrong, then my squat might be wrong, then my hinge might be wrong, and then we got to start all over again. So get this right first. That'll help you get this right, and then we can build from there. But if we don't get anything right from the beginning, we're not in a good spot. So let's start with learning how to control that pelvis, get into a nice neutral canister position. That's it for this presentation. And the second presentation will be posted, and it'll be the squat. Thanks, guys.